Hold it. Let's bring it back with some style. What up everyone, I am Gallant Havoc and welcome to the new and improved Inspired By, where I talk about some of my favorite artists' careers, style, and how they inspired me as an artist and creator. You can check out my Inspired By playlist for the other episodes, where I have covered the late great creator of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Kazuki Takahashi, the man responsible for the creation of one of my favorite comic books, and also absolute favorite movie of all time, The Crow, James O'Barr. Famous comic book writer and artist Frank Miller of Sin City and 300 fame, and one of the creators of Witchblade the Darkness, Cyberforce, as well as his famed works on the X-Men and my favorite superhero, Wolverine, Mark Silvestri. And speaking of Silvestri, today's episode, after 2 freaking years, is on fellow Image founder Todd McFarlane. Famous for his work on Spider-Man, the creation of fan-favorite villain turned anti-hero Venom, as well as the most successful independent superhero of all time, Spawn. And many more credits, I might add. So without further ado, let's get the ball rolling on the new episode of Inspired By. Drawing from a young age, McFarlane also began his hobby of collecting comics, getting his hands on as many as he could. He was a fan of works done by many prolific comic book artists at the time, such as Jack Kirby, Frank Miller, John Byrne, and George Perez. At 16, McFarlane would draw the prototype version of Spawn, who would sit in his high school portfolio for years to come before the character exploded onto the comic book scene in the 90s. McFarlane delved into sports while working as a groundskeeper for the Calgary Cardinals, where he would meet his future wife, Wanda, namesake for Spawn's wife, Wanda. After high school, he would bounce between colleges and universities on baseball scholarships, going from Gonzaga University to Spokane Community College, then Eastern Washington University, where he would also work as a janitor and would work on his drawing skills after completing his homework and his duties on the job. McFarlane desired to be a professional baseball player, but due to an ankle injury followed by placing last on the roster for tryouts for the Toronto Blue Jays farm team, the drive to be a professional baseball player ended, and he shifted to working on comics full-time. Come the 80s, McFarlane would send 30 to 40 packages of submissions a month out to comic editors, totaling out at 700 submissions. However, most of them were in the form of pinups, a term used for comic pages that were one pieces of art with no dialogue. Half would receive no response, while the other half were rejected. However, he did receive some constructive criticism from a few editors. Sal Amendola of DC Comics was one of them. He sent McFarlane a dummy strip to challenge his page-to-page storytelling ability. The advice Amendola offered persuaded McFarlane to create a 5-page sample of Coyote from Eclipse Comics, though it would eventually fall under Epic Comics, an imprint of Marvel. Steve Englehart, the creator of Coyote, would eventually receive the sample, and would be the one to reach out to McFarlane and offer his first comics job, a backup Coyote story released in 1984. McFarlane, who was returning to his and Wanda's trailer from work, was alerted by his girlfriend bursting through the door and asking who Englehart was, as he had just called offering the job. McFarlane would then begin drawing for both DC and Marvel. His first big credit was on the 2-year run of DC's Infinity Incorporated from 1985 to 1987. Soon after, he would illustrate the last 3 issues of the 4-part Batman Year 2 storyline. Afterwards, from 87 to 88, he would work alongside Peter David for Marvel on The Incredible Hulk. Then would come the time of probably McFarlane's most successful work on Marvel in the form of his run on The Amazing Spider-Man! Come 88, McFarlane joined David Michelini, a writer for Marvel, beginning with issue 298, where McFarlane had previously drawn the preliminary cover for on the back of an Incredible Hulk page he had done previously. This was when Spider-Man's design underwent a significant change under McFarlane's style, with his poses becoming more dynamic, acrobatic, the eyes on the mask becoming larger, the webs on his suit being more numerous, and the webs he swung from becoming more rope-like, or as the fans came to dub it, spaghetti webbing. McFarlane would then draw the first full appearance of Eddie Brock, who would soon become fan-favorite villain turned anti-hero, Venom. of whom he was credited as co-creator. His work on Amazing Spider-Man would make him an industry superstar. His cover art for Amazing Spider-Man issue 313, which he was paid a mere $700 for in 1989, would eventually bolster to $71,200 come 2010. However, the high on his work on Spider-Man would wear off, as McFarlane became more and more dissatisfied with not having any control over the stories being told. He started missing deadlines, resulting in guest artists needing to fill in for him on certain issues. Due to this, McFarlane would eventually leave The Amazing Spider-Man on issue 328, as he had stated he wanted to write his own stories. The issue was part of the company-wide Acts of Vengeance crossover storyline, and its cover would include Spider-Man taking on the Hulk. The original art would go on to sell for a record-breaking $657,250 the highest auction price ever sold for a piece of comic book art. By some poetic twist of fate, McFarlane's role will be filled in by future fellow Image Comics founder Erik Larsen. However, McFarlane wasn't done with the webhead, as Marvel wished to appease him by giving him an adjectiveless Spider-Man title for him to both write and draw. The series would run for 16 issues, 15 of which McFarlane was directly involved in, and would often include appearances of Wolverine and Ghost Rider, my two favorite superheroes. The first issue of this run included several variant covers to appease comic collectors, which fed into the infamous comic speculator bubble of the 1990s, where the practice of producing several editions inflated the demand of comic book collecting. During this run of Spider-Man, McFarlane would begin to face some criticism on his handling of the storylines, particularly his writing skills. His subject matter was also called into question, being considered too gruesome or adult for the general audience, such as Juggernaut losing an eye, which they censored, or had Spider-Man dealing with more mature subject matter, which could be considered indicators on what was to come for McFarlane's own character, Spawn. With the controversies finally reaching a boiling point, McFarlane teamed up with 6 other popular artists from the comic book industry. Those 6 were Mark Silvestri, Rob Liefeld, Erik Larsen, Jim Valentino, Jim Lee, and Willis Portacio. I am sorry for the pronunciation. Who all collectively wanted to tell their own stories as opposed to conform to the comic book norms dictated by Marvel and DC. Essentially, they were rebels, and together they formed the 3rd largest selling comic book company, Image Comics, earning them the affectionate nickname, the Image Boys, who would go on to publish projects such as Saga, The Walking Dead, Witchblade, The Darkness, Invincible, and of course, Spawn. Under Image, McFarlane created his own in-house publisher, Todd McFarlane Productions Incorporated, and would finally resurrect the high school portfolio creation, Spawn, releasing the first issue in May of 1992. Regarding his writing skills, McFarlane hired guest writers for issues number 8 to 11 to better flesh out Spawn, including legends Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, and Frank Miller. Greg Capullo will be brought on as penciler as of issue 26, with McFarlane inking and writing up until issue 70. Spawn was considered a massive hit, with Wizard magazine calling it, at the time, the best-selling comic on a consistent basis that is currently being published. Fast forward to 1994, Image and DC would collaborate on a crossover project in the form of 2 books where Batman and Spawn cross paths with one another. The first book, titled Batman Spawn War Devil, was written by Doug Munch, Chuck Dixon, and Alan Grant. No, not that Alan Grant. And was drawn by Klaus Johnson. The second book, simply titled Batman Spawn, was written by Frank Miller and drawn by McFarlane. This would be the final year where McFarlane was a primary writer and artist for Spawn. He would off and on appear and offer story points and inked covers for some issues. Jumping to 2006, McFarlane would work on another installment of Batman Spawn with Greg Capullo. McFarlane wrote and inked the project and acted as a tribute to the legendary Jack Kirby. McFarlane would then work with Walking Dead creator Robert Kirkman to create Haunt, a project that was announced in 2007 and released in 2009. The comic began being written by Kirkman, penciled by Ryan Ottley, and inked by McFarlane, though he would occasionally pencil some issues and would write issue number 28, which would be Haunt's series finale, with Joe Casey, who took over the main writer role from Kirkman. Come 2019, Spawn would have his 301st issue, surpassing Dave Sims' Cerebus at 300 issues, and will become the longest running creator-owned comic. It even earned McFarlane a place in the Guinness World Records. McFarlane would then once again work on a Batman Spawn crossover, with Greg Capullo as the artist, which was released in December 2022. So that covers McFarlane's comic history so far, but he has had other ventures as well. In 1994, McFarlane founded his own toy brand in the form of McFarlane Toys, initially called Todd Toys, who specialized in highly detailed action figures and statues from an assortment of media, including his own and others' comics, cartoons, movies, and even video games. And further, Todd McFarlane Entertainment, which would eventually lead to the creation of the very well-received animated series Todd McFarlane's Spawn, starring none other than Keith motherfucking David as the titular hero in 1997.
You're about 2 seconds from wearing that smile around your ass.
Oh, and the Spawn live-action movie starring Michael Jai White, but I wouldn't recommend it. The series ran for 3 seasons until it ended on somewhat of a cliffhanger. Side note, I'll never forgive them for that. McFarlane has also done work in the music industry, providing artwork for Iced Earth's Spawn-based concept album in 1996, The Dark Sage, and Korn's third album, Follow the Leader, in 1998, in which he would produce the music video for Freak on a Leash, as well as the music video for Pearl Jam's Do the Evolution in the same year. Among other artists, he has also produced the music video for Disturbed's cover of Land of Confusion, alongside Greg Capullo in 2005, and fast forward to 2022, Patient Number 9 by Ozzy Osbourne. But not only has he worked in the music industry as well, his characters, particularly Spawn, have appeared in multiple video games. Spawn had his own solo outing on the Super Nintendo in 1995. In 2002, Spawn would appear as the Xbox exclusive guest character in Soul Calibur 2, alongside an original character made by McFarlane, Necrid. He would have yet another solo outing in Spawn Armageddon, released on the Xbox, PS2, and GameCube in 2003. Fast forward to 2020, Spawn will make his long-awaited and wanted appearance in Mortal Kombat 11, and will most recently appear in Call of Duty Warzone in 2023. And to cap his career off, he has been reportedly set to direct a new live-action Spawn film starring Jamie Foxx. Whew! Pretty seasoned resume if you ask me. And he's been around not nearly as long as Frank Miller. So moving on, let's talk his technique and style. McFarlane used a pretty traditional approach to his art, using pencil, pen, and marker to bring his visions to life, with a style very reminiscent of some of the all-time greats like Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and Neil Adams. However, that's not to say he doesn't have his own charm. Just look at the more acrobatic poses he gave Spider-Man during his run, as well as the more web-like, well, webs. You want a good reference for acrobatic and dynamic poses? Look no further. Speaking of his charm, it especially shows when it comes to his more monstrous creations like Venom, Malbolgia, and Violator. The latter two looking like something straight out of a nightmare. Oh, and Violator's alter ego, the Clown, because everybody loves clowns.
I fucking hate clowns.
Low-key props to Leguizamo's portrayal in the 1997 film, by the way. Definitely a highlight despite everything else about that movie. Also, capes. McFarlane loves capes, much to the chagrin of Edna Mode.
No capes!
Looking mainly at Spawn and Batman, the way McFarlane does capes really stands out, giving the characters more of a large and foreboding appearance. And as said before, he's not afraid to delve into more mature subject matter. These are all the things that culminate in a McFarlane's artist identity. So with all that being said, let's talk about how McFarlane has inspired me. Truth be told, it isn't so much McFarlane's style that inspires me, with the exception of the way he does monsters and characters like Venom, but his willingness to delve into darker subject matter no matter the controversy. That's what does it for me because, like I have said many times before, I have an innate love for anything dark and edgy. And it was arguably thanks to him that more adult-oriented comics became such a mainstay. I'd say it's between him and Miller. Watching Spawn's animated series and reading some of the comics added on to that for me. So with all that being said, it's time for my own take on one, or rather, two, of McFarlane's famed creations. I couldn't decide which I wanted to do more, so I mixed them up. Which fits, given the symbiotic nature of both characters. So here's what would happen if Venom, or rather the Venom symbiote, bonded with Spawn. This is actually the second take I did, as the first one I just couldn't get behind. So I started over. For the better, if you ask me. Anyway, folks, that's about all I have to say for this very long episode. Inspired By is back and with a vengeance, and I'm planning on doing more. The next episode of Inspired By will be on none other than Hiromu Arakawa, the creator, writer, and artist of the critically acclaimed Full Metal Alchemist. So here's hoping it doesn't take me another 2 years to come out with it. I gotta say though, it's good to have a little break from reviews and go back to something I am really passionate about, that being art. But anyway folks, I am Gallon Havoc. Wreak some havoc, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, one last thing. Art's not my only passion.